Good evening, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Nina Kler, and I'm so excited to have been able to collaborate with Raghu of Minds Foundation to celebrate DaanUtsav through these extremely meaningful conversations. We've had two so far. Today is our third and final one, and I'm so happy that we're doing this. So, today's topic is about mental health and alternative supplementation. So basically, 2021 has been shameful when it comes to the rise in mental health issues, specifically substance use, suicide, depression, and anxiety. To date, we have treated many conditions with psychotherapy and psychopharmacology. However, there's significant room to treat individuals and communities through alternatives including supplementation, vitamins, adaptogens, amino acids, plant medicine, nutritional avenues, and wellness modalities, yoga, meditation, mindfulness, breath works, the entire gamut essentially. The key moving forward is the integration of such alternatives, ancient and novel practices, into existing mental health treatment paradigms. This panel that we've put together will bring individuals working on the front lines of these treatment modalities for a lively discourse on how best to combat the rising mental health numbers. So, in this fabulous panel, we have with us today Zak Williams, Dr. Alok Chopra, Raghu Appasani, Dr. Raghu Appasani, actually. And I'm Nina Kler. I'm a well-being crusader and a mental health advocate, an anchor, and a writer. Zak Williams is a mental health advocate supporting multiple organizations and is the CEO and co-founder of PIM Health, working to help people feel like their best selves. He is also the son of the legendary actor, the late Robin Williams, who has warmed many of our hearts and made life bearable at times, I think, when we were all growing up. So I'm so happy, Zach, that you could join us. Really, really happy to have you. Then we have with us Dr. Alok Chopra, trained as a cardiologist after studying in UK and the US. He practiced for many years. He became disillusioned like Siddhartha and went to Vegas to become qualified in function medicine, post which he opened one of the most coveted wellness centers in the country called Devam Wellness. Now he largely focuses on cardiometabolic diseases, including the mental and emotional aspects of chronic illness. He is also my doctor, 911. Dr. Raghu Appasani is the founder and CEO of the Minds Foundation, a psychiatrist, a neuroscientist, and an ardent mental health advocate who's known for being very experimental. So apart from, collaborating with me on this, he is a perfect candidate for the conversation because he's superbly experimental. He's right at the edge of all sorts of innovation. Perfect candidate. Thank you so much for joining. I'm really excited to be hosting this conversation. And Raghu, I'm going to jump right in with my first question to you. Since we're talking of a wide range of treatments, I think it's important for us to talk about what the actual state of treatment for mental health issues is in 2021.
Yeah, thank you so much for hosting. We have Zach and Dr. Chopra here as well. And, right now, the way that we treat a lot of mental health conditions is we have psychopharmacology interventions, so medications, antidepressants, antipsychotic medications, and those are very useful for many patients who require it. And when they're in a severe bout of mental ill health. There's also psychotherapy, all different kinds of modalities in that front. And those are helpful for everyone, even from mild to, moderate to severe. And that ranges from individual to group therapies as well, couples therapies. And those are basically the standard approaches to mental health now. The conversation has definitely expanded over the past, decade or so to encompass more of, I guess, the term well-being, where we start to think about things like the importance of exercise and physical health. And there's the gut-brain hypothesis as well on how what we eat starts to affect our mood and how we're feeling emotionally and psychologically. And so people are starting to open up now and understanding those connections. However, right now in 2021, what we see is that there's a lot of research and resources being put into other things like the psychedelic space and the benefits of psychedelic medicine for mental health, to start with, at least. However, there's still a bit of a stigma around that, specifically even from the healthcare professionals themselves. So it's very exciting actually to be on the frontier of that and to be starting to get trained and to do research in that front. The last piece is the type of work that's being done at PIM Health, which is the company that Zak founded along with his wife. And I have the pleasure of being the chief medical officer and collaborating with him. Um, we're trying to bring supplementation to the forefront, where it's about looking at what is out of balance, right? And a lot of humans, we have grown over the years, but we've also developed things like the Western diet, and we have a lot of air pollutants and climate change, and all of that affects our mental health. So we really need to start looking at not putting band-aids with medication and only therapy, which are both helpful, but looking holistically at what is out of balance in the modern society that we're in, and can we use natural supplementation to augment or to support and to catalyze people to feel better. And so this type of work has been done and continues to be done, but it's often done in individual clinics or in silos by practitioners. So what really needs to happen is we need to start to bring more evidence and research towards these types of treatments and really bring it to the forefront and create accessibility and scale.
Raghu, I love your approach because it's heart based. I think first of all, you're all heart, and it's holistic. And when I work with, while I do have a psychiatrist, I'm not on any medication. So when Alok looks at me, he will tell me that you need so and so supplements, and I've seen such a massive difference. I stopped. By the way, Alok, I haven't been having my supplements for a while. Hence, I needed to pop that pill today. Just FYI. But I have noticed that with supplementation, actually, it's made a huge difference to me. I feel far more regulated. So totally appreciate your line of thinking, because there are not many psychiatrists, Raghu, who have a holistic and heartful approach to the way they treat mental health issues. So Alok, my question to you is a mouthful, so bear with me. So the most vexed and flogged to death question is, are alternative supplements really needed, or is it another new age fad? And if they're good for us, why are they so expensive? Why are they not FDA or ADA or NIH or CDC approved? And as a result of that, is there a possibility that they are unregulated and one wouldn't know whether they are junk or not? Bottom line, how do we know if they are junk or not? You need to, Alok, you have to unmute yourself. Oops.
But question of alternative supplements will always remain vexed as long as there's a conflict between big pharma and functional medicine practitioners. The fact is that the FDA, ADA, NIH, and the CDC doesn't want to recognize it because the supplement industry is a direct threat to the billions and the trillion-dollar industry that they have made, and it will actually upset the entire foundation. And as a result, it's left the supplement industry to be unregulated, which is very sad. So I think the need of the hour is, and I don't know how it's done in the US, but we need a recognized body who will bring this up and raise the standard of the supplement industry. But the other problem is that a lot of the people in the supplement industry are putting in some inert substances and some junk and over advertising them, and it's given them a bad name. I know there are some companies like that. It's not across the board. There are a lot of good companies, and I wish that they have to put a lot of money. So that is expensive because you have to compete with it, and there's a lot of research in putting it together to mimic something which mimics something in our body, in our food products. So which is why they're a little bit more expensive. But the problem is that we have to use both. Many people are using modern medicine, big pharma medicine, and supplements. So the whole story has become an expensive game. So somewhere down the line, someone has to resolve this problem. I give you an example of omega-3. Omega-3 is one subject which has been snatched from the supplement market into the big pharma market. And I was talking to Dr. Paul Clayton, who is, I think, a Nobel Prize nominee for his work in omega-3, and we had a long chat with him, a lecture with him very recently, and he told us in no mean words that 96% of the omega-3 market is junk. Now that was very frightening to me. The other thing is that we haven't kept up with our epigenetics, and just for everyone knowledge, we know that it's the study of the biological mechanisms which turns our genes off and off, and the relationship to health and disease. So let us look at the body, and just bear with me for a moment, as a pyramid. And the base of the pyramid we take, and this is chosen from Tom O'Brien, one of our gurus, that the base of our pyramid is the structural integrity. One side is our mind and the impact on our body. The third is the other part of the pyramid is what we eat, breathe, and drink. And lastly is the electromagnetic forces and the toxins that are down, playing a game there. Now let's look at our exposures, our lifestyles, our environment, our nutrition, and our mental attitudes. So these collective exposures, we have given this, refer to this as a name, we call it the exposome, another favorite word which Mark Hyman has actually produced. And this exposome is greatly influenced by the world, within us and outside us. And this has changed more in the last 100 years than in the natural history of mankind. What I'm trying to get at is that there is so much opportunity to look at the body in this manner, in four different manners, and our exposures in 3 different manners, and create the epigenetic version of supplements. What I mean is that every part of our body, every part of our exposure, we can make separate supplements so that they create greater, understanding. People will, can differentiate them, and which is why all this is good. So, I mean, that's the way I look at it.
Thank you, Alok. Thank you so much. Zak, coming to you. Firstly, thank you so much for joining in. I know a number of people who are so excited that we're having this conversation. So thank you so much. I'd like to ask you, first of all, why mental health for you? And can you tell us about the origin of PIM and what motivated you to start such a unique company?
Well, thank you. First off, thank you for having me, Nina. From an origin perspective, mental health for me was something that I didn't prioritize early in my life, even though I had some dysregulation, specifically obsessive thinking with OCD, manifesting in my adolescence into anxiety, something that I sought unhealthy means to manage, like alcohol use. And throughout, my early adult life, I used these unhealthy means to deal with something that I could actually deal with in much more healthy means, but didn't know I had the opportunity to do so. All that came to a head, this dysregulation, after my dad died by suicide. I was diagnosed with PTSD and found myself abusing alcohol to manage that trauma, and started dealing with major mental health issues, extreme anxiety, bouts of depression, and then, of course, the accompanying trauma, and realized that something had to give. And I actually discovered commitment to mental health advocacy was very healing for the trauma. We can talk about a little bit of that later. But in discovering that and having that insight, and then cutting out abusing alcohol, I found that I was able to manage that anxiety and the depression through balancing my neurotransmitter environment. I didn't know at the time that that's what I was doing, but I discovered amino acid formulation specifically as a means of getting the supplementation I needed to manage that deficiency. In my case specifically, I have serotonin deficiency, GABA deficiency, just naturally. If I don't take care of myself, if I don't eat what I need to be eating, GABA deficiency, serotonin deficiency, some dopaminergic issues. I have some dopamine dysregulation, and then some issues with things like norepinephrine, adrenal environment, which is the gamut, is the spectrum of issues. I'm leaving out a few there, but all that considered led me to to experience a lot of anguish and frustration, and so in starting to manage that specifically through supplementation, fitness, some lifestyle changes, like stopping drinking alcohol, I was able to get a footing, and I wanted to share my insights with, or the insight from my personal journey with others, and as part of that, my wife Olivia June and I decided to. She was my girlfriend at the time. Decided to start a company that was a brand focused on breaking down the stigma associated with mental health, while standing for mental health advocacy and being a brand that stood for mental health, like Starbucks stands for coffee or Red Bull stands for energy. And I used to say like Coca-Cola stands for a refreshment, but there's some issues with that. I kind of prefer saying like Coca-Cola stands for sugar water now. But the goal of the company, so the brand side, our mission focus was stigma reduction and spreading awareness around mental health solutions. But on the product side, we realized there's a whole suite of products that can support, in our case specifically, the majority of Americans, and then ideally expanding abroad. We sell to Canada now too, but can support the majority of adults who are experiencing neurotransmitter deficiencies based upon lifestyle, in many cases a Western diet, lack of routines and mental health hygiene rituals that promote a healthy, balanced life. So that's what we wanted to do with PIM, just create an opportunity for people to develop understanding and experience education around what they can do to support themselves, versus just succumbing to this ethos that there's a pill that can solve all your problems in life, or if you do this one thing, whether it's CBT or exercise regularly, that's gonna manage all your issues. The fact of the matter is that there's a mosaic that people require engaging within that will provide an optimal solution for them, and that mosaic is different for every individual. So yes, therapy is helpful. Yes, fitness is helpful. In some cases, pharmaceutical interventions can be very helpful, but the majority of situations require a mix of solutions. And in many, many cases, balancing the neurotransmitter environment is a direct result of getting the nutrition and supplementation needed. So that's what PIM stands for: precision-oriented support for people.
Zak, I could do like a whole interview just on you. Seriously, there's so much I'd want to ask you. And I definitely want to come back to what you originally were talking about, trauma and advocacy, because that's something that I find when I advocate, I feel so much better myself. So I definitely want to come back to that. But I'm curious to know, Zak, that your wife is also from the mental health space, or is it because of your journey together that she became involved in PIM and in advocacy?
It's a great question, Nina. And actually, my wife was involved in an adjacent manner with mental health, because she developed a platform for women to meet friends. This is before we met, actually. It's called Vina. The website is heyvina.com or vina.io. And her reason for starting the company was to solve for loneliness that women were experiencing through lack of friendship. So she was no stranger to the mission and the cause, but in terms of becoming directly related to mental health advocacy, it started, her work started going straight down the fairway with what we're doing with PIM.
Wow, but I think that is a space, definitely, Zak, women and connecting. It's priceless. I realized, and in fact, I had a conversation during DaanUtsav itself during this week with a very famous Kama Sutra goddess of sorts. And I was saying, as I'm growing older, I'm realizing the value of female friendships. So is your wife still involved with this platform that she started? Or did that take a back seat with PIM?
She is still involved with the platform.
Oh,
Yes.
wow. I'd love to look it up. Wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you so much, Zach. We're going to come back to you and pick your mind and learn more about your story in a bit. So, Raghu, can you speak to what the purpose and need of supplementation is, whether as independent treatment alone or in conjunction with traditional pharmacological agents?
Sure, thank you. I'm loving this conversation so far. And the need for the supplementation is that, as I mentioned earlier, society has modernized in many ways, and we no longer work in the same manner. We were speaking about this on the panel yesterday, right, about workplace well-being and how there's no more boundary now between home and work, and it's not really a clock in, clock out situation. So what happens with that is that we start to develop a constant state of stress, and that chronic stress leads to a lot of other issues, whether it's stomach, GI issues, fatigue, headaches, energy depletion, and we start to cope with things like alcohol or caffeine and unhealthy behaviors. So that's one of the main issues. And so basically what's happening is that we haven't changed much as humans, but the surroundings around us have changed, and what we put into our bodies has changed. Normally, these neurotransmitters, things like dopamine and GABA and glutamate and serotonin that Zach was mentioning, they're made with building blocks called amino acids. And the amino acids, normally we were getting from very healthy foods and diverse array of foods. However, we're not getting that now anymore as much as we used to. So we start to have dysregulation and altered levels in the balance of these, and we start to not feel like our best selves, and we start to not be able to function at peak performance. So there's a huge role for supplementation for a general public in that sense, to really help to catalyze and to get us to that peak performance. And it is not to say that someone needs to be on a supplement their entire life, right? If they start to take a nutritional psychiatry approach and start to change their lifestyle and their diet and start to get these building blocks again, that would be great. But it's a very big challenge to do that given climate change, given the way that we do agriculture these days. So I do believe that the supplementation is very helpful for a general public from that perspective. Secondly, for those that are already on medication or require some form of medication, the supplementation can help balance that out. It can help with adverse side effects as well from medication to really help optimize the treatment plan that someone's on.
Oh, wow. Wow. And Raghu, one of the questions I'd asked you personally is if you have too many supplements, does that mess with you?
I think Dr. Chopra is probably a veteran in exploring that question. But what I'll say about that is, yes, right? I mean, here's the thing. So your body needs a certain amount of vitamins. It needs a certain amount of minerals, of supplements. The problem is you don't want to overdo it. And I have seen people, and I've had patients as well, who, they literally have a bucket or a huge bag of supplements, and you don't need all of that. First of all, I think it's important to recognize which ones are good and validated. And it's one of the reasons I'm excited about PIM, because we are investing into the research as well, right? Not just creating the supplement. So it's important to recognize which supplements are validated. Dr. Chopra was mentioning how, something 90% or more of omega-3 out there is not great. So that's one thing. We have to understand that. Secondly, it can have a huge impact on things like your kidney function because you're excreting. And if you're taking in a lot of supplement, the majority of it you don't really need necessarily, and it's going to be excreted and over time impact things like your kidney function. So it's important to work with, functional medicine doctors. And, I think more and more people need to start to be trained in this so we can optimize supplementation use as well.
Wonderful. So, Alok, I know that you love supplementation. So mental health and emotional health are the biggies right now in the illness field, so to speak, right? Either on their own or part of the continued angst of untreatable chronic illnesses. You see that on a regular basis. Whenever we've spoken, you mentioned that to me. So do you think that we have, or do we need supplements for them? And if yes, what's your experience with their successes or failure? If you could unmute yourself, please.
First of all, the answer is a big yes. But before I say that, we are, it's in our system. It's become an integral part of our lives because challenges and controversies are forever chasing us. And this changing, competitive, goal-oriented, high-tech world, we are floating between the stress of jobs, careers, finances, family issues, divorces, and the melancholic humdrum of our loneliness and our despair. And this is then further compounded by the arrival of chronic illness, which makes the mental illness much worse to cope with. So, as a result, our bodies are running on empty and we have drained out our stress hormones. Hence, the urgent need to fill all the or water all the parts which have been taken out. It's a very urgent need for supplements. And this problem is compounded by another bad word which Big Pharma has brought in, which is a hopelessly flogged to death word called guidelines. See, guidelines are opinions made by people who have vested interests, biases, and self-serving priorities. This is not science. Science is something which is open to interpretation and even challenged if needed. And practicing that gives you an illusion of reality, and the people who practice it, an illusion of care. Very important point also is that the science so preached to us so far are like, we are like blinders in a racehorse, as they can see only this much and no more. So science has protected us from what we don't know by pretending to know. Protecting us from what we don't know by pretending to know. Now, this is the blind spot of science, and it's very relevant to mental and emotional disorders. As a result, we get only 50% of the facts. We only deal with 50% of the total picture, and we can resolve only 50% of the problem. And then we are told that this is the entire picture. So what has this done for us? It has unleashed a tsunami of mental and emotional disorders caused by pushing us on the wrong path. Good ideas spread, but bad ideas, hang around like ghosts in curtains, and we don't even question what is right and wrong. Now, the point is, what if we had taken the right path and not listened to the advice of the regulatory bodies? We would have not been burdened with all these harmful drugs, and we would have flourished on supplements and lifestyle changes. Mistakes happen in science, and they will continue to happen because science is not admitting to what it doesn't know. Science is not admitting to what it doesn't know. And we are taking that part of the health equation, the one which needs to be healed. I really look for the time when science would admit what they don't know, admit that they have hidden things in the past, and admit that something more needs to be done. See, medicine was an art. It's the language of medicine is performing an operation theater, the state of the art. This like things like that. Voltaire used to say that the job of a doctor is to amuse the patient till nature takes its course. Again, that's what we should be looking at. And again, we are also mistaking correlation and causation. Because, let's imagine we are giving a conventional antidepressive drug to someone. Now, this man changes. Now, change does not mean that he has been healed, but it is announced as if this guy is better. Instead, we have shackled his mind, made him a silent zombie, and given him a chemically instilled, source of sort of apathy. Now, what if we could, use the psychedelic drugs? And I know the CIA has used them. If we combine the controlled use of psychedelic drugs and combine it with our supplements, my God, what a wonderful thing that we would create. And these medicines are 50, 60 years old. And Big Pharma are not allowing the psychedelic drugs to come in. I'm a great fan of controlled psychedelic drugs, and I'm glad that you are in this game, and I'd be happy to see it happening.
Alok, actually, Raghu has been very busy the last couple of days because he was at an MDMA conference. MDMA, was it?
I'm actually in the formal training, so we had a retreat. But I will argue, Dr. Chopra, it's not just 50 years old. Psychedelic drug use, psychedelic medicines and plants have been used for centuries, traditionally. And
no, sorry, I meant that the big pharma drugs were introduced in the 1950s and 1960s.
I agree.
That prehistoric.
And Raghu, I haven't told you this, but Alok is a big proponent when it comes to CBD as well. So yes, he's pretty out there. Thank you so much. Now, Zak, I'm going to come to you. First of all, I'm so happy to know that you're investing in trials. I think that's wonderful. It's very promising because when I was talking to a child psychiatrist earlier today, and I was talking about, how can we get supplements for children? I was mentioning this conversation today. And she said, Nina, I like to err on the side of caution. And unless and until there are trials done for something, I will never even remotely suggest children having those supplements. So very happy to hear that. And I now want to know your point of view of where you personally see the mental health space moving. Your thoughts on that.
Yeah, well, I think right now we're at the toddlerhood of integrated mental health treatments. There's some very forward-thinking people, but it hasn't reached mass market, mass consciousness at this point. And when I say integrated, I mean opportunities for people to get the treatment they need often requires adjunct experiences. Adjunct from a clinical standpoint means something and something else, right? Therapy and supplementation, CBT and meditation practice, whatever, those are two random pairings, but the point I'm trying to make is there's a precision model in which someone applies enough effort into diagnostics, understanding themselves, potentially a clinician or practitioner, having enough of an understanding of a patient's data and ultimate kind of holistic systems environment so that they can say, hey, we want to do process X, Y, and Z, and subsequent to that, we'll have a very clear idea of what it is you need. Now, the question is, how fast can you, how can that process be accelerated whereby someone can get to their precision support environment? And we're at the infancy of that because there are some emerging technologies like artificial intelligence, specifically, applications of machine learning to analyze data and provide better insights, recommendations, potentially suggesting protocols or joint methods of support. These are massive opportunities that we're just scratching the surface of. That said, that systems support environment, that precision support environment for people's mental health has historically been hard to apply because of the nature in which data is generated. It's generally generated in silos, whether it's a healthcare system or a practitioner not having access to certain data. There's the personal data that's generated from someone just going about their daily life that is very valuable when integrated into providers' data or clinicians' data. And the more that we can unify that environment, of course, in a private manner, the more we can develop insights, understandings, and things like machine learning environments and training data to better provide precision recommendations. It's all about precision recommendations, and there's very few experiences out there that really enable that opportunity for a patient.
That's fascinating. I mean, I think that the beauty is that something is there's so much growth that can possibly happen. So sounds very, very promising and exciting what you spoke about, Zak. Raghu, coming to you again, what is your vision for the future of mental health treatment and how we speak about it essentially?
Sure. My vision's twofold. One of them is, I think, from the mind's perspective, which is our mission from the get-go has been to provide education to people so that they feel literate in using terminology, because at the end of the day, the words we use can have a huge impact on our interactions with each other and how they feel. So it helps alleviate the stigma as well, and also creates an environment where people are more likely to seek care. So that's the first part, is continuing to provide education. So I envision a place where everyone is somewhat educated in mental health and understanding of it, right? And I think that's more from the advocacy and the Minds Foundation perspective. The second piece is some of the work that I've been doing with Zak actually around this concept of trying to approach precision mental health. how do we use someone's personal data? How do we use big data as well? Integrate all of that together to really create unique treatment plans. Right now we have the DSM, or the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, which is pretty much universally used to diagnose mental health conditions. And unfortunately, some of it is not culturally appropriate in many places of the world. And it also creates a criteria. And it's, if you meet 5 of these 9 things, then you have major depressive disorder. How do you know that? I mean, you don't know the etiology of someone and how they're doing and what they need for healing, right? So I like to imagine a place where we start to go away from using that manual and start looking at the person in front of us as an individual, and what is their makeup, what are their traumas, their experiences they've had, and currently what's their state, right? What is their emotional state, their spiritual state, their hormonal state, neurotransmitter state, and developing personalized treatment. It's very precise based on those things. So using all of the technologies that Zak had mentioned, whether it's AI or all of this data, creating patterns and creating a platform where someone can get real-time feedback and work closely with providers to actually develop treatment that is effective, efficient, and gets them to a place where they feel good much faster than we do now. Traditional antidepressants take at least 4 to 6 weeks minimum to really start to feel an effect. And that's too long. I mean, imagine someone who is having suicidal thoughts and feeling very depressed. Their appetite is poor. They're not engaging. They're not sleeping. You're going to wait 4 to 6 weeks for them to feel better. I mean, and they're already apathetic and have not much motivation. You're asking them to take a daily medication for over a month. I mean, that's tough. How do we get to a place where we can engage someone closely and say, this is real-time feedback data, and this is, you're seeing it, you're seeing your healing happening. That's what I hope it'll be like, and not so far into the future, but more so into the present, hopefully.
That sounds like a dream come true, Raghu. You're so right. Because I remember back in the day when I was on medication, 2000 to 2005, I remember when I started the medication, I was miserable. The first 4 to 6 weeks, in fact, forget feeling better, I felt worse. I felt awful. But if there's promise of something like what you're talking about, that just seems so reassuring for people out there who are suffering from mental health problems at this time, to get that real-time feedback. And wow, sounds like something that gives so much relief. Thank you so much, Raghu. So Zak, now coming to you. This is again a very long question. Your work as an advocate, your personal journey, your experience in entertainment and business is a unique lens. So what do you feel is one thing that the everyday citizen can do to enhance society's well-being?
The
Was that a
first thing,
mouthful?
yeah, no, I think there's a couple of things that can be done. The first thing I would say is educate yourself. And that involves taking information in from several different sources. The modern media diet, whether it comes from social media or is generally customized and tailored to your biases, because the assumption is that you're going to be diving into that media in a voracious way. You're going to be more engaged with that media, but the media that's being served to you, whether it's through Facebook, sort of Twitter, Instagram, what have you, is tailored, and as a result of that, it might not be the best thing that you could be consuming to broaden your understanding and learning. It could be helpful, but there's a very high possibility that's just meant to confirm everything that you believe, which creates basically a barbell effect. It doesn't enable you to develop empathy and understanding and the like of kind of, a broader mindset. So the first thing I'd say is find opportunities to learn outside of your comfort zone. The second thing I would say is start developing an understanding of what you need to do to feel fulfilled, meaning first starting with your mental health, but also understanding what is it that you can do for others that makes you feel happy, and kind of build off that. So, from there you could say, hey, when I engage in this activity involving connecting with people and it's service oriented and it makes me happy, I feel satisfied. It could be working with kids. It could be working with animals. It could be supporting the environment, and the ecosystem. It could be any number of different things, but find that opportunity to be of service and work out how you can best derive happiness from it. And that's the selfish element of it. But those are my big three. Go outside your comfort zone in terms of learning, because it will benefit you in the longer run. 2 is find your mental health hygiene rituals, find what you can do to support your mental health. So you can 3, apply a lens of service to deriving fulfillment and happiness.
Oh, I love that. I love that 3-point plan. But Zach, I want to ask you. So, you're talking about happiness, right? I'm just curious to know that what is your relationship with comedy? I mean, your dad was just such a legend, right? So, did you ever get into comedy? I mean, how do you feel about comedy? I'd love to know.
I mean, I love comedy. I'm not a comic, and I never aspired to be a comedian. But there's a culture associated with it that's actually very much related to mental health and mental health issues. It takes a lot to be a comic. You don't just set out to be, a doctor or a lawyer or a comic, right? Well, actually, let me reframe that. You don't set out to be a comic like you would a doctor or a lawyer. Generally, there's a set of circumstances in your life that led you down the path to comedy. It's a very lonely profession in a lot of circumstances. It's one that's rife with mental health considerations and potential substance abuse. And there's a lot, and it's absolutely riddled with joy and laughter and meaningful connections and everything in between. And I think it's important to frame comedy as a solution, a foil in a lot of circumstances, and communities of comics are a wonderfully empathetic and troubled bunch. And as part of that, I think there's opportunities for comedy, for using humor to shed light on dark subjects. When it comes to health issues or the like, you can apply humor to actually find opportunities for healing and to, establish vulnerability, to learn more. So, there's the lens of humor as a means of shedding light on challenging or dark issues, but also the broader lens of kind of the relationship between mental health and comedy. Comedians by nature have to take a very challenging, lonely path to get to it, to get to it becoming a career. And that journey for many leads to, whether it's mental health issues, but also, discussions around very challenging topics. And so, no, I'm not a comedian, but I'm very interested in the intersection of comedy and mental health, because it has all sorts of unique and fascinating facets.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing that, Zach. Raghu, I saw you nodding your head. Is there something that you'd like to say before I shoot you a question?
Oh, I was just gonna say, I mean, Zach is pretty funny though sometimes, so I'll give him that.
Okay. So Raghu, now could you shed some light? And Zach, I definitely have to ask you this question before we wrap up about trauma and advocacy. Definitely have to ask you that. But Raghu, for now, can you shed some light on the potential or dangers, downsides of things like psychedelic medicine and natural supplementation, the downside?
Sure. I think one of the most obvious downsides is going to an extreme side of it, right? And someone saying, I'm only going to take natural supplementation, or I'm only going to do psychedelics. And they're not open to other things, like whether it be therapy or the need for traditional pharmacological agents when they need it. So I think that we have to be able to find an integration that's healthy. And so that's a huge downside. Speaking specifically about the psychedelic front, though, so much promise. I mean, these medicines have been used for centuries by indigenous tribes, traditional cultures, and there's a huge benefit to them. And fortunately, now there's a lot of research being put in as well. Again, right? There was a lot of research done historically in the past before the war on drugs, and now it's happening again. And there's a lot of people in the scene. One of the dangers of it, though, is that it's just like medication is not for everybody. Psychedelics is not necessarily for everybody. And as I learn more and more about it and I become more formally trained in the space, the importance of therapy along with psychedelics is critical. To take a substance like MDMA or psilocybin or ayahuasca or whatever it is a very profound and powerful experience. And it's really important to have people who know kind of what they're doing to be there in that space with you and to help you along that journey of healing. So what worries me is companies and initiatives taking here you can take it at home, or the recreational use of psychedelics again, which is not 100% terrible, but if someone has a lot of deep-seated mental health or trauma, even if they're not conscious of it, it can come up in the wrong setting without the right providers there to help you and guide you through it. So much promise for psychedelics. I mean, I'm a huge advocate. I've personally benefited from them as well. And, I'll say that out front because it's important to recognize that even healthcare professionals do benefit and have had experiences. But we need to be able to respect the power of psychedelics. We have to be able to respect the traditional and indigenous use of them. And these are things that were used in community. They were not used in, alone in single person settings, isolated. They're used in community, and that's where a lot of power comes. So the downside is that, and if someone has underlying mental health conditions that are not addressed, it can trigger them. So it's important to work with someone who knows what they're doing. It's the one area that I'm super excited about moving forward to, and using that along with supplementation. I mean, that's an amazing healing journey for someone.
You said ayahuasca, and I recall a friend telling me, Raghu, that she had such a wonderful experience. I mean, when she had it, it was awful. She said she had to be tied, she was vomiting, etc., etc. But she said the profound visions that she had, they changed her life forever. Now she's quite a well-known mindfulness teacher in upstate New York, actually. So that really changed her life. But like what you said, it's not for everybody. But Raghu, I do have to ask you a question. So would marijuana, like if you go to somebody who gives you marijuana, like Viha, can you pull Raghu up on screen as well, please? Yeah. So Raghu, I just want to know, how sometimes people go, like recently Emily told me about a journey that she had, but it was supervised. So who are the kind of people who supervise these journeys? Does it have to be a doctor? Who do I go to have a supervised journey?
It doesn't need to be a doctor, but there should be a medical history and intake taken just to make sure that, there's understanding of what your underlying conditions might be. Because, these are substances you are putting on. And as you mentioned, there are other effects of it, whether it's GI or headache, or, you want to make sure if you're on other medications or supplements that someone takes a look at that, because there can be interactions. So that's really critical. But, there's a lot of folks, especially from these traditional communities, who have learned this over generations, and that's a very safe place to go as well. Here in the United States, we have an organization called MAPS, the Multidisciplinary Association of Psychedelic Sciences, and they're behind a lot of the clinical trials and research over the past number of decades. They have trained and licensed practitioners running trials. That's a great place to go. There's other institutions that are validated. In the UK, the Beckley Foundation. So it is a bit endless, and there are more and more practitioners who are growing that are credible and licensed. So, you don't have to necessarily go and do it in a dodgy home with someone who says they're a shaman but might not be. There's a lot of resources now that people can reach out to.
Wonderful. Alok, actually, I had read an article recently online about a place where it was a secret location, and a journalist had gone undercover in Chhatarpur itself. So Chhatarpur is a neighborhood where Alok lives. Yeah. So there was a party that happened there. You have to unmute yourself, and there was a shaman who two of them who administered ayahuasca, and there was a whole journey that happened. So I don't know if you're aware of that or not, but coming to adaptogens now, the buzzword. Alok, the
Well,
buzzword.
Well, before I go into adaptogens, I have to admit that I had a limited version of a shaman who was who was Italian, and I didn't know shamans are Italians as well. But we took a little secretive thing amongst a bunch of us. He gave us a limited version of ayahuasca, and I had the most interesting experience, which opened up my subconscious mind. The subconscious mind, as we know, is part of our animalistic and banal desires and how we get over them. Suppressed rage is the biggest one. Unfulfilled ambitions. Everything was addressed, and I felt I was swimming under a city underwater, and I was trying to struggle myself out of it. It was a great experience. The girl next to me, I had to wake her up because she was screaming, and I woke her up, and she gave me one tight slap. I said, "What's up?" She says, "You stopped. I was having an orgasm for 20 minutes." That's interesting. Anyway, so back to, so I have had a very interesting experience with it. Anyway, back to adaptogens. Adaptogens, one of my first appeals to both Raghu and Zak are that let's please do something about them, because we have always considered adaptogens as botanical treasures, like plant alchemists. They have a unique ability to increase the body's resistance to multiple stressors, which may be physical, emotional, chemical, or environmental. And they correct the imbalances that they are created without any harmful or unwanted effects. And they work in a non-specific manner. That's the important point. But working in a non-specific...
to hop in and say something. Zak, what would you like to say?
I do not want to interrupt Dr. Chopra. I would love for him to...
Okay.
Right.
So because they work in a non-specific manner, they actually correct the deranged homeostasis in general and repair the damaged DNA, and which causes our illness and aging via the regenerative properties, which involve both, all the body, mind, and spirit. They also sort of combine the curative powers of water, soil, air, and sunlight, and call it a precious medicine. Now, certain qualifications: they have to be non-toxic in therapeutic doses. They produce a non-specific response in the body. They must have resistance to stressors. But the most interesting part of adaptogens is that they have a normalizing and balancing bidirectional effect on the body, which means that this is a unique intelligence which has decided to see what the body needs. If one is exhausted, ashwagandha will energize you. If you are on adrenal overdrive, it will have a calming effect on you. And they affect the whole body regardless, but the focus is still the neuroendocrine in the immune systems and our parasympathetic system. Yeah, that's the great thing about it. Now, they have been actually present since millennia, but the official recognition, I believe, was somewhere in the 1940s. In Chinese medicine, they are called chi tonics. In Ayurveda, they're called rasayanas. Nutritive tonics in Western medicine, and in the rainforest, they're called paratoda, which means heal all. So these are things which are present all over the place. The other aspect is that they also involve the hypothalamic pituitary axis, and they are involved in all our meditative states, in deep consciousness, perceptions, mysticism, spirits, sorrow. Look at the depth at which they are going in. So, you can keep talking, but I have to differentiate that, because the name of the gentleman, one second, Israel Breckman, who has actually given the classification into primary and secondary adaptogens. Primary adaptogens are ones which are researched and completely cleared, and secondary adaptogens are still which need some amount of research in them. And I'm going to just mention some of them. The primary adaptogens, the 10 primary adaptogens which are accepted. One is ashwagandha, which is Withania somnifera, cordyceps, eleutherio, ginseng, holy basil, licorice, rhodiola, Shilandra, Shilajit. These are the 10 primary adaptogens. And I mean, I'm not going to name the secondary ones because there are 30 or 40 of them. But what I have done is that I did a little bit of research on the primary ones, and I can send you a little, sort of a little trailer of the 10 primary adaptogens, what they do and how we can do that. So one of my great concerns is that how can we put them together? Because a lot of the people think that they are also RAN. They're not also RAN. They are the only substances which are non-toxic and invade your body, and they correct all the restorative parts of it. And the best part is that bidirectional nature. And because they are non-specific, they go and water every little path. So my earnest request to both Zach and Raghu, that if we can make something like this, it will be a great help, and it will be something which will, along with the psychedelic drugs, change the face of mental health.
So, Dr. Chopra, I'm a fan of adaptogens. I think there's a massive opportunity that's unmet at present. We have some clinical barriers and some some barriers with quality of supply of the products of adaptogenic products for the Western market. The clinical barriers are the nature of adaptogens and them being exogenous in nature make a more expensive clinical testing environment, make for a more expensive clinical testing environment, because adaptogens cannot be grouped together and tested as a tonic, if you will, and still be considered tested with clinical rigor, because anything tested and verified as a tonic or the like would need to be in that exact, mixture to be verified and the like. So there's some barriers. And by the way, I'm a big fan of adaptogens. I love them. I hope that they establish more adoption in Western medicine, but also in the Western healthcare environment. But there needs to be more resources unlocked to individually test adaptogens and then test the contraindications and how they interact with one another. Because without that, the resources unlocked for those testing environments, it will be reserved for kind of the health and wellness and functional medicine sphere, which is not a bad thing by any means. It just requires more broader adoption for use, say, with general practitioners and the like. That's what I would love to see, but it requires a foundation or a company coming in and say, hey, we want to invest X amount of resources into individually testing these exogenous compounds, right? And so that's what I would say is the challenge. The other challenge would be veracity of source. We've seen this issue with PIM products. It took a while to source very high quality ingredients because, specifically with rhodiola, because often there's mislabeling, and we run into that issue a lot when it comes to everything from ashwagandha to passion flower to rhodiola to any number of different things. So I am convinced that adaptogens will be transformative for people. The question is, how can we apply rigor to the testing process so people can embrace it in a knowing that it's clinically tested. You're muted, Dr. Chopra.
You're muted.
Oh, no, I'm not. What we need is a sugar daddy who will fund this research, I think. And I think at some level, we need to also try to use it because, they do have a non-toxic label. So I wonder whether it can be squeezed in or slid under the door to make a individual sort of research, and then once that comes up we can build it more. But I understand the quality is a very big problem, and there's a lot of hoax going around, especially with cordyceps. I remember someone brought in cordyceps, and people were running after it and it's sold in the black market. It wasn't nice. So I understand that, but I wish that the combination of adaptogens and the psychedelic drugs will really, really be a great, great, great thing to happen. And let's hope it
There's
happens.
huge opportunity there. Raghu, would you like to say something before we wrap up? This has been such an insightful conversation.
Yeah, I mean, I love this, and I'm glad that all of us could come together and speak about this. And perhaps by the next time we're all together, we will have the ultimate precision mental health platform created, and people will be doing so much better. But I appreciate everybody vocalizing and being very open here, because these are the types of conversations that will help bring attention and start to create real change in the landscape and how we see mental health, speak about mental health, and eventually treat it.
Thank you so much for what you do, Raghu. It's been really an honor to moderate this session. But like I said, really quickly, Zak, I do have to pick your brain on trauma and advocacy. How does that make you feel? I want you to talk just a little bit about that, because when I heard your podcast today, it stuck with me.
Trauma and advocacy. Oh, so, for me, advocacy helps heal the trauma. And I'm still undergoing, some phase changes through how I'm dealing with the trauma. But it really boils down to the simple insight for me that service is a path to happiness. I am in pursuit of happiness, finding fulfillment and joy. And I realize that commitment to advocacy and service is the simplest way to achieve delight and joy while feeling connected and ultimately integrated within communities. And I need that. Otherwise, I'm isolated, and I don't want to be isolated. It's not a happy environment for me to be in.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Zak. That was really wonderful. So I think we're going to wrap up now. This has been a wonderful 3-day series. And Raghu, thank you so much for doing this with me. I really appreciate it. And
Yeah, thank you for always supporting us. It's always great to work with you.
Can I just make one point, Nina? I
Yes,
want to also say that, the supplements that we have used or I have used successfully, you see, fall into three categories. One which are not made in the body, one which is found in our foods, and one has to be made in the lab. I think we must at least advocate those which are found in plant-based sources and animal sources, which we need, and also sources which are actually within our range. So why not advocate this more, and at least that we can push a lot of this stuff easily. I mean, take melatonin, for example, it's made in our body. Take quercetin, for example, which is needed so much, but it is found in so many other things, like capers and citrus foods and all those things. Why don't we elevate this point up so that people can understand that it's part of our biochemistry, it's part of our food, and then everything will be accepted more easily. That's how I feel.
Okay, so my biggest learning from this is that we have to find a sugar daddy. Okay, first of all, find a sugar daddy. And I need to find a sugar daddy who's going to help me do a conference on what we have spoken about. I think there's just so much material here. And really, we could go on and on. But Raghu has a patient who's waiting right now. So we're going to sign off. It was so wonderful.
Can I amend that statement? Maybe we could find a stevia daddy or an allulose daddy instead.
There you go. Have a wonderful evening, everybody. Wonderful day, you guys, actually. And thank you to the audience for joining in. It's been such a pleasure. And this is the last day of DaanUtsav. Go ahead and do your acts of giving and enjoy yourself. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Great to see you guys. Thank you so much, Nina.